Hey, what's up? Energy Physio, capping out the shoulder today for overhead position and internal rotation. And so, really, the idea here is just a quick recap. Caden, I'm going to mute you for now. Getting a lot of echo. So, I think the key things here to remember are you need to be able to assess and identify in an athlete. This is really in the context of CrossFit, but really if you're a coach or a trainer in any setting, personal training, small group, whatever, you need to be able to figure out why people aren't moving very well, especially if they have pain. And this stuff is not that difficult. And, so we've been going through the last couple of weeks of, what are some of the compensations we see? What are the problems around movement? What are the problems around not helping people through coaching, kind of problem solve around some of this stuff? And, the idea here is hey, assess the problem, figure out what's going on, and have a very simple solution that can be provided quickly so you don't eat up a bunch of time to help the person move better, right? So last week we covered how do you assess overhead and internal rotation. You do that from the same position laying down. So if you missed last week, go back and check that out. And it's just really easy to quickly figure out if somebody missing motion up here and motion over here. I know you can't see my arm there. But if they are, you need to be able to fix that, because what we're looking for with movement is not, can you complete the movement? Yes or no. We want a higher quality than that, because, there's this old concept, quality over quantity, and you want to get to quantities of movement. That is important. But if you get to quantities of movement with poor quality, you're going to get a lot of breakdown in the body really quickly, and that's where pain conditions start to set in. You start to get overuse injuries, which is a term that I hate. It's really misuse. You are misusing your body, not overusing it, because we see incredible feats of athletic endurance, strength, and capability across the board. Look at the Olympics. I mean, these guys, all they do is use their bodies and train and train and train and train. And by all accounts, they're relatively injury-free. So it's not about overusing, it's about misusing your body. And part of that is from not knowing what to do, not knowing how to address problems, not knowing how to even identify if the problem is there. And I think a lot of that stems from the fact that people think pain is the indicator of the problem. This is something we haven't really touched on, and that is people think pain is the problem, but really it's a lagging indicator. Pain shows up after the problem's been going on for a while. And so then people have pain and they think, oh, I got something going on. And really it's too late. And to get back to that, maybe we can take the mobility cam over to the board and show people our I3 model, injury incidents and incomplete mechanics. That's really where this conversation stems from, and kind of bring that to light a little bit. But today we're going to cover what are the positions you want to see, what are the compensations you're going to see when somebody's missing a position, and then what can you provide the athlete quickly to help resolve the missing position? And then if they can't resolve it, how can you scale them intelligently and have a systematic process to restore them back to normal so that they can progress their skills, progress their strength, progress their volume, whatever the case may be, without wrecking themselves. So that's really what we're after today. So in the gym, how common do you feel like it is, Caden? Because you're coaching every week. How often are you seeing other people coach?
I would say I get to see other people coach only if I happen to be taking their class, which for the most part ends up being in the morning. So I've only got a couple of people that I would get to see, or if it's on a Saturday, then I might get to see some other people coach. I would like to find ways to get more time with that to watch, but it's at least once or twice a week I get to see some other people do coaching.
And how often do you see coaches assessing somebody's mobility?
Pretty rarely. That's something that I would love to bring into our group dynamic at our gym, is hey, we need to start hitting some of this stuff. There's actually one of our coaches, now that you say that, his name's Miles, and I've worked with him in the past on some stuff, and I actually walked into one of his classes a little bit late, and he had already started having some of the athletes doing the hip mobilizations off the rig and some shoulder mobilizations to start the day. So that was actually pretty good.
Yeah, it's great. It's great to see that stuff, especially you get people start to integrate and understand it, and then have a real solid intention behind it. It's easy to get lost in this stuff and be doing it just to do it. But doing it and getting the reps in makes you familiar, makes you comfortable, and then it's easy to transition over to, I understand the intention behind this, and now you can put it where it's supposed to go really well. But really cool you shared that with Miles, and he started using it. That's exactly what we want. That's why we're sharing this information. We hope coaches see it. It's why we offer, like coaches coaching the coaches, where we go in and we'll work with a group of coaches for a weekend just on problem solving around movement limitations in the athlete, how to recognize them, problem solve, scale the movements, keep their athletes healthy. Because at the end of the day, healthy athletes pay their membership and keep coming to the gym. And that's what your gym owners want. And so it's just our way of kind of the circle of gym life, how we fit into that, helping members stay and pay and refer their friends because they're having a great experience. But let's jump over to the board real quick. We'll talk about the I3 model, and then we'll jump into how you can help your athletes mobilize around the two problems we've really been zoning in on, which if you missed last week, we're really looking at overhead position and internal rotation. And we'll chat through those, show you the solutions, and then come up with some creative hacks around how do you manage your athletes, because some of this stuff's a little different. Definitely have to check your ego at the door for some of this stuff, but really valuable for your athletes and to help them progress and scale back up to what movement is considered normal or RX or whatever you're doing in the gym. So let's hop over to the board real quick. We'll talk about the I3. We'll just go to your book. Oh, hey.
I got a package.
Yeah, heck yeah.
It's not for me.
All right. Been waiting on that. Thank you. Our mail never gets delivered here, always next door. So y'all say hi to Becky. Always bringing our mail over. Okay, so check this out. The I3 model is something really cool, and it helps us walk patients through why what we do here is so different, but it's also in the gym how you can help your athletes understand why you're doing what you're doing, because pain rarely shows up in like where you think it will. And the reasons why somebody is moving the way they do is not always at the place where they're hurting. And so this is why we have to understand at a global level how somebody's moving and what all contributing factors there are, even outside of like, hey, my shoulder hurts and I'm missing range of motion. What do I do to improve that? Certainly those things help, but there is a bigger conversation here that needs to be had. But the I3 model is simply, we've got 3 different zones that we're going to find people in. Over here, we've got injury, right? The middle one is incidents, and this is incomplete mechanics. I'm not going to write all that out. And so briefly what this is like if you're injured, your life has changed. You cannot do things normally. You're not eating like normal or dressing like normal. You can't drive your car. You can't go to work. You can't do something. And so this is like thinking post-surgery. You got hit by a car. Something has dramatically changed your life. Not many people are over here. Almost everybody we see is right here. And this is, like, simply put, this is pain. Like, a lot of people have pain. It doesn't mean their life has been totally altered. They're still going about their day, but they've got some nagging, some nuisance, whatever. Maybe it changes a little bit of how they train, but ultimately they're living their life normally. And in most rehab settings, they're going to try to address this. And this is the problem with rehab, and why rehab is so silly these days is because pain is not the problem, and pain is never where the problem is at. And so trying to solve for this might give you a short-term benefit, but ultimately you're not going to get the result you want long-term by focusing right here, okay? But the thing to know here is this is where most people are at. They have a problem, but it's not changing the way they live. And then the real things you want to get to are incomplete mechanics. And this is, we'll say, decreased joint mobility, okay? Decreased movement control. Those are incomplete mechanics. So the person doesn't have the prerequisite availability in a varying number of joints to create movement that matches what we anticipate movement should look like. So when we watch somebody press, it should look a certain way. When somebody presses, it should look a certain way and feel a certain way to them. Same thing with the squat, the deadlift. There are all these movement targets that we want to see people hit, because when they're hitting those targets, we know they're moving safe, they're moving efficiently, they're moving in pathways that are less stressful for their body. And ultimately, the safest positions are the most powerful positions. And so that's really where the athlete wants to be, is how can they get stronger, produce more power, do more volume, whatever the case may be. So these are really where you want to look at. So when you have pain, you don't want to solve for pain. You want to solve for the joint problems in the entire body. That's why we do full body always. And you want to solve for movement problems, because the way you move is going to control how you feel. Okay, and the way you move is controlled by your joints, and the way your joints move is controlled by your habits. And so really, to get to the root of this, there may even be one step further back here. And there's no word for habits that starts with an I. But like, the way you live your life is ultimately what gets you here. And if you can't solve for that, you're not going to solve anybody's problem. But being able to take a look at somebody who has pain, or maybe they don't have pain, because remember, pain's not the indicator of a problem. Knowing if their joints are moving well and their movement looks like it should is the indicator of a problem. And then knowing how to solve for X on these is really where you want to be. So we're going to slide over to the rig. I'm going to show you real quick how we can restore overhead position really quickly. I'm going to show you how we can restore internal rotation really quickly. And then we're going to move through a series of different movements and talk through why you're going to choose those versus not. So let's shift over here. I'm going to grab a lacrosse ball real quick. All right, so overhead position, you recognize somebody is maybe stuck right in here. You did the floor test to see, they're laying down, butt squeezed, abs tight, and they can't get their arms to the floor. They're stuck springy out in here somewhere. One of the easiest go-tos that's so simple to implement is just called an overhead distraction. Distraction is a joint principle in manual therapy. It's one of the most rudimentary things, and it's super easy to do. But essentially, throw a band over the rig somewhere up high, kind of loosely wrap it around the hand so that the hand doesn't have to squeeze and hold on, but it provides enough kind of grip around the wrist that you can pull some tension into it and start to back away and create traction in the shoulder. Now, the real key things here are when the shoulder is moving upwards. So anything overhead, we want that combined with external rotation, right? That's the stable, most efficient position in the joint. And so what we see a lot of times is people press up, they run out of room, and they default into internal rotation. And they'll end up straight overhead with a bent elbow and the arm out to the side. And those are some telltale signs that they're missing range of motion. If their arm is overhead but the elbow's bent, they're missing range of motion. Have them straighten the elbow, and it's going to look like this. If it looks like this, that's a bad position. We want to solve for that. So throw the hand in the band. And then the big key here is using your opposite hand to reach around, hook into the elbow pit here, and create external rotation in the shoulder. We don't want this arm flaring out into internal rotation. So use the other hand as a block. From here, simply just going to back away, pull some tension into the shoulder. You're going to feel that in triceps and lats. Once you do that, you're going to work into the overhead and restricted position. So, and then once you find the in range, you're just going to spend a couple of minutes here, right? So we're looking for these little 2-minute doses to solve these problems quickly. And what your athletes will notice if you do test, work the joint, retest, is they're going to have an increase in motion when they come back to it. So 2 minutes here, just holding onto this position, letting it stretch out, creates a traction in the joint. And then you could have them lay right back down, retest their motion, 100% guarantee it's going to be better. So that's a quick, easy solution for overhead. I'm going to show you real quick how we tackle internal rotation. Most of the time, it's not a joint problem. The muscles are just stiff from postural compensation. So easy way to get into some of the muscles that minimize internal rotation is to put some pressure through the external rotators, right? So position on the side, whatever the shoulder is, the shoulder that's down. Arm kind of at a 90 degree here. And then you're going to position the lacrosse ball right on the side of the shoulder blade, kind of right at the bottom of the pit crease. And you're just going to kind of noodle around on that until you feel it's in a really tender spot. When it's in a tender spot, you know you're in the right spot. From there, we're just going to do some windshield wipers here, where we're kind of got some pressure through those muscles, and now we're contracting and stretching those muscles out over that pressure. That's pretty gnarly. We're looking for 30 reps here. After the 30 reps, real easy thing to do, if you remember from last week, is just flip over to the back, squeeze the butt, tighten the abs, roll the shoulder down. And I can tell you, I remember how this felt for me last week, and it was pretty limited. This feels much better just after 10 reps, and I can tell my position is better without the shoulder flaring up. So stuff's not hard. It works really well, and that's what you want. You want these quick, easy solutions for your athletes to make big changes in their positions without wasting a bunch of time during class, because we know everybody's on the clock. So let's transition real quick. Let's say you've worked your athlete. They were missing some overhead position or missing some internal rotation. And now you're rechecking. And you've got them laying on the ground, and they're better, but they're not all the way there. And then the question is, what do? Do you think, oh, it's better, so we should continue working the overhead position? Our answer is no. We want to see people taking reps and volume in the most pristine position possible. As soon as you start to break center of gravity and you're pressing with the weight up here, it's either really stressful on the shoulder, or you're going to see people compensate with the spine and arch to get this arm straight up and down. You don't want that. So we're going to talk through scale for shoulder press, a scale for pull-ups. And this is a good scale for pull-ups for maybe they're just, the position's fine, but they don't have enough strength to get to a pull-up or even a banded pull-up yet. We got some scales for that rather than just dropping down to the ring row. But shoulder press, pull-up, and then what's the other one we talked about, Cade? I forget. Seems like there's something. Well, if it comes up, we'll talk about it. All right, so your athlete's not quite got full range of motion yet. What are you going to do? We don't think it's appropriate just to let them lift with a better position if it's still not correct. So what we like to do is position the torso angle so that their finished position is straight up and down wherever their limitation is. So I'll show you this real quick. If they lay down and they got butt squeezed, abs tight, and they're hanging out right in here, okay, we want to find the torso angle either on an incline bench or a box that has them at the very end range of what they have available by placing their torso angle there. So what that looks like is simply this. Take a box, make sure it's not going to go anywhere. You don't want them to do this against the wall because they're going to fight the wall with the dumbbell. But if somebody's got this much motion available, simply slide out until the available motion is straight up and down. Okay, the body likes to be parallel with gravity. Any deviations that are too stressful can lead to problems. And then you're just going to have them press right there. So if the goal is overhead press, you could do this both sides, totally fine. But if the goal here is strict press with a dumbbell, this is a great way to do it. You can scale them up as their motion improves by just getting them a little closer to the box. Okay. And then once they get full 180 here with no problems, we're moving into a standing position for regular shoulder press overhead. You could do this with the bar, training bar, add weight, keep the bar light until it's comfortable. It's harder to place up here, but it can be done. And remember, we're not talking about just weaklings here. This stuff is appropriate just for, strong athletes who are missing positions, and you're trying to help them improve those positions, get more athletic, and also not wreck themselves in the process. So something to think about here is if you have an athlete that is missing position, we really don't want them working with speed. Okay, we want to like dial everything back to strict positions. That's going to keep them really safe, allow them to grease the wheel of the movement, right? Anytime you add speed, you lose control. It's just the way it is. And when we're working on moving through certain positions correctly, the slower the better, technically. So even adding, like going back to strict strength and even adding tempo can help your athletes better understand what position their body is in. If they have these kind of checkpoints along the way of what position their body's in and they're moving slow enough to recognize those, it gives their brain a little bit of time to respond and autocorrect as the movement is happening. And so adding tempo in is a really nice hack for somebody who's missing range of motion, and we're trying to scale them back up to normal positions, right? So this next one, we're going to talk about the pull-up, and then I'm actually going to flip it around to Caden, and he's going to talk through like the 3 different categories of movement, which are essentially, you're layering in complexity and why we see loss of position as things start to get more difficult as the complexity changes, and why we want to back things down to strict strength when we're dealing with range of motion issues and movement problems. So let's hit this real quick. So your athletes can't do pull-ups. And if you got a 5-year athlete and they still can't do pull-ups, then just straight to your face, you have not scaled them appropriately. Sorry about your bad luck there. But if they can't do banded pull-ups either, that's really a strength problem, and you've got to have different pathways for them to take to develop that strength. The biggest problem we see is when athletes go from the vertical pull-up plane down to a ring row, which is not only a different set of muscle group, but a different plane of movement. And so we don't want to do that. We want to keep them in this pulling plane as much as we can and load that as much as we can to help them scale up to the banded pull-up and then eventually a bodyweight pull-up. So what we like to do, and you can do this kneeling down on the ground, you could have them sit on a bench, doesn't matter how you position their body really, but you can use the bands to essentially create a lat pull down in the clinic. You see the lat pull down machine in almost every commercial gym on the planet, but you start to get into functional fitness and you lose some of these things that allow average Joes to get those planes of movement in, so you have to get a little more creative, right? So this is a medium weight band. You could use a small one if you needed it. You could use 2 of these and have one for each arm if you needed it. You could do a heavier band and use both arms on the heavier band. It doesn't really matter. The goal is just stay in the plane of movement and progressively overload. The same principles apply to this style of training that every other training uses on the plane. So, grab the band here. If somebody just has missing strength, so maybe they have full overhead mobility, great. Have them grab the band and they can do a double kneel, butt squeeze abs tight, and just pull down. Okay, if it's light to start, have them develop a good squeeze and a conscious contraction around the lats. If it's still easy, add tempo, a 1, 2, 3 second eccentric. Eccentrics are the best way to add strength quickly. A lot of research behind that. Or if it's still too easy, just add some bands to it. I mean, it gets harder at the bottom, okay? It's easier at the top, so there's some detriment there when you're trying to scale it to a pull-up, because a pull-up is technically hardest at the bottom. But this is a great way to start adding in that vertical plane of strength, and you just have to progressively overload intelligently to help your athletes get there. Now, the flip side of that, somebody's missing range of motion. They got plenty of strength, but when they hang from the bar, you see the broken spine position because they're missing shoulder range of motion. They can't get tight and engaged in a hollow position. Even if they're strong, we want to get them a good load stimulus just like a pull-up would do. So this is where you get really heavy bands, multiple bands, whatever. But then you need to position their body where their arm is at the end range of motion. So they only have this much shoulder range of motion. You want them pulling right here. Okay. I know, big, strong athlete, big dude. Seems silly to do this type of stuff, but big, strong athletes who are missing range of motion, tear the rotator cuffs and don't come back. So that's really what we're trying to avoid here. So those are the basic scales, really easy to do. These are great for new members too, who are just getting into the mix of CrossFit, functional training, and you need some creative stuff to get them plugged in class. You don't want to totally ostracize them and pull them away from the movements everybody else is doing. And so creating something that's as similar as possible, really nice tools to have in your tool belt. So we're going to flip it around. Katie's going to talk through those 3 categories of movement and why we think coming back to strict for range of motion problems is so important.
All right, how's that? There we go. All right, sorry for the delay, guys. We're working on a live stream software that's hard to get. And you got eval and so okay. So essentially, what we're talking about when it comes to these different layers that Chad's talking about is I like to refer to them as the different layers of intensity. Okay, when we look at intensity specifically in CrossFit, what we learn in the L1 is the mechanics, consistency, intensity model. We want good, solid mechanics. We want to do things consistently well. Then and only then do we add intensity to our movements. So let's take the first foundational movement of CrossFit, for instance, which is our air squat. Okay, that is like the basic movement overall. And what we look at with mechanics are, can we get equal foot pressure? Can we get downward parallel, keeping the torso up, all that kind of stuff. And then, can we consistently do it the same way, rep after rep after rep? Okay, and we're looking at this in like a single rep platform. Single rep, does it look good? Cool, let's repeat it. Once we get to where we're doing those the same every single time, now we're looking at adding intensity, and that comes in 3 different factors. One of the first ones that comes is volume. Can we just do more of the same thing one after the other? So now it turns into, can we do 2 in a row? Can we do 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 in a row at a slow tempo and have them all look the same? If stuff starts to look really good, now we can add speed. Speed is another one where we can test without any sort of external load. Can we do the movement faster and still maintain the same mechanics that we wanted from before? If not, we need to go back, we need to slow down and make sure that we're doing that strict movement the same all the way through. The third and final level of intensity is load. So now we can take something like a dumbbell, adding external load to the movement, doing multiple reps, and potentially doing multiple reps with some sort of speed. If at any point along the way, you're noticing an athlete having an issue where they've got a dumbbell and they're just kind of starting to collapse at the bottom, they're looking like this with their squats, something's going on where we need to adjust to one of those levels of intensity. First thing is probably take the weight off. Now that we don't have weight, can we slow down the movement, get things back in order, and then start to build back up from there? So that's essentially where we want to be.
Showing those 3 positions in the shoulder, talking through like press, push, jerk, and how those changes in positions.
So I don't know if you guys heard Chad or not. He's saying he wants me to go through the press positions. Okay, so unweighted for the press, for instance. Let's see if we can find our pipe. PVC pipe is always the best way to work through some of these things because it's super light. basically unweighted. If you can't handle the PVC, then your positions are probably not going to be as great even when you add some load. So for the press, strict press. Can we get our shoulders in the position that we want? Can we do that over and over and over again if it's looking really good? And then as we start to add speed, here's where we start to add a little bit of extra movement with like push press. We're using our hips to generate some force, and we're driving that bar up a lot faster. Can we still finish in the same shape at the top of that position at the end? We start to get really good with that. We start to add load on top of it. So now we got heavier weight, trying to do some of the same things. And as the weight gets heavier, do you look the same through your press, or do we start to see compensations like bending the back and pushing the head too far through and things like that? And that's where we want to start to back off a little bit if we need to. Another form of this, kind of follow the different levels model of movement. Dr. Koester had talked about that in the past. When we start to see ourselves starting in one shape and finishing in a different shape, do all of those same things apply as well? Are we being accurate with our movement? Are we moving consistently well? And how do those levels of intensity sort of stack up in that?
Yeah, that's good. Let's flip back to the computers and we'll wrap up the conversation.
Flipping back to the computers.
Better. Yeah, you bring up a good point about like movement accuracy. And certainly in a class where you're one coach to many athletes, this gets a little more challenging, but this is where you can start to pick up on inefficiencies in higher level athletes who are probably missing some range of motion positions. And maybe you don't have to scale them down to something that's ridiculous in the session, but you can give them these things to work on and slow things down a bit outside of the session. It's not like if you do this workout, your shoulder's going to explode. The body's more resilient than that, and especially if they've already developed like the foundational levels of strength and muscle mass, the body's going to tolerate that better than like your newcomer who's moving poorly and adding volume on top of bad movement patterns. So there's a little bit of some gray area there, but we want to be like identifying these problems and helping athletes solve for them, whether it be directly in class or giving them some homework to do or some pre-class work to do to set themselves up to move better. That's really what we want. And, when we're looking at something like CrossFit, especially, what we see a lot in our athletes here is they come in and like, they're doing butterfly pull-ups or kipping pull-ups, but they can't do 5 strict pull-ups. And that makes no sense whatsoever. Or we see people doing push press or push jerk with a decent amount of volume or weight, but their strict strength is actually really low. And that's like, it's a pyramid that's upside down. And at some point, the thing's just going to topple over. And so, we see the CrossFit zone almost like divided in thirds. You got like strict strength, you got these category 2s, and then 3s, we got some patients walking in. And so we'll wrap this up next time. See you later.